Okay, good morning, and welcome to the second task force meeting to reimagine policing in Brookline. I'm Raul Fernandez, Select Board member and chair of the task force. Joined with me our task force members as well as dedicated town staff here to support the work of the task force. This is our second meeting, and our first meeting last week. We engaged in a little bit of organizing. We were thinking about sort of a work plan, got to know who the task force members are, and looking forward to doing this work. We agreed that today, what we would do primarily is to receive a presentation on the structure and operation of the Brookline Police Department that would help us better formulate our questions about the kinds of work that they're doing. And again, with respect to reimagining, whether or not that work is, in the view of this task force, appropriate to be done by the police department, or whether or not some of that work might be better done elsewhere. So for now, we have an opportunity to listen and to learn about the current activities of the department, and then we'll take it from there. We've got, a really brief agenda. The work today is really going to be driven by the questions and the thoughts of the members of the task force itself. So expect that to be the bulk of our dialogue today. So first things first, we have on the agenda. Do we need Devin to do anything related to sort of gaveling in for this meeting, or are we simply good to go?
No, you're good to go.
Okay, good. First item on the agenda is to approve the minutes from last week. Devin sent those out to everybody. I don't know if two things you can do here with the minutes. One is you can send in any edits you have directly to Devin. A very distant second is recommending those edits here during this meeting. But if you do have edits that you didn't get a chance to send in to Devin related to the minutes, you're welcome to share them now. Any edits now to the minutes? Okay. As a reminder, if you do have any, best thing to do is once you see those minutes, read them and send in any edits you have to Devin so that we can approve the final version at this meeting. Okay, Devin, in terms of approving minutes in this format, do we need to do, is this an all those in favor? Do we need to do a roll call vote? How should we do that here?
I believe that any Zoom meeting has to be a roll call vote. Okay. So I would just go down the panelist list.
Okay, so
Raul, excuse me, I did have some edits, but can I send them to Devin later, or?
Are they minor edits, or are they anything substantive that you think?
No, they're minor edits just to add on to some specificity on what I said. So that, there weren't major edits or anything.
Okay, Devin, is that fine?
Yes. Yep. You can say, approved pending the edits.
Great. Approved it pending the edits. All right. So what we'll do is we'll go down the line. It'd be helpful if you can either have yourself unmuted at this time or be ready to quickly unmute so we can go through this quickly. So all those in favor of approving the edits, I'll call your name. Malcolm? Didn't hear your voice, actually. We're going to make sure that you're there. Okay, good. Ann? I didn't hear your voice either. I see you, but we're actually not hearing you.
She's on mute.
Yeah, she's on mute now, but she wasn't before. Try again. All right, we need to work on, we can't hear you for some reason, even if you're on mute. So we'll come back to you. Almas?
Yes, approved.
Chi-Chi?
Approved. I have one edit about the description of me. That's a minor edit, but approved with that.
Okay, great. Let's make sure we get that right. Great. Alexander? Is that an aye?
Yes.
Okay. Kristen?
Approved.
Okay. Mike?
Aye.
Kimberly?
Aye.
Bonnie?
Aye.
Eitan?
Yep, aye.
And I vote aye. Okay, looks like we lost Ann. I'm sure we'll get her back in just a moment. Okay. Just a reminder, it looks like everyone's done it because you're all phenomenal at this point. Oh, Ann, can we hear you now?
Aye.
Yes, we can. Love it. Good, good. So you all know to mute when you're not speaking. You're doing a great job. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. So I wanted to get in and turn it over to a former Brookline Police Chief, Daniel OLeary. He sent us over a PowerPoint presentation, which he'll deliver now. I'm sure there's lots more to just the slides that we got. And I think, Dan, tell us, would you prefer if we held our questions to the end? Is this kind of thing where you'd like us to interrupt if we have questions? I'm hesitant to do that, but just want to hear from you first. We'll need to unmute you. Unmute yourself. There we go.
There we go.
Yep.
Okay, I would like to do it the best way, a little bit interactive. If I could go through slide by slide, and then at the end of each slide, if we have questions so we don't get off the subject, I'd be more than happy to do that. I'd just like to give an overview of, if you saw the PowerPoint, it's an overview of our organization chart, how we operate as a police department. Then we go into how we hire, how we promote, and a little bit of the accountability factors and some of the agreements that we have outside of the police department. And if we could do it that way, just let me get through a slide and then I'll stop and we'll take questions on that slide.
Makes sense to me. That sounds great. If folks with questions can use the hand raise feature, and what I can do is I can call on folks as they have questions. Remember, you just click on participants and then you can raise your hand there. That helps us keep track of all the folks that have questions about what's going on. The other thing I'll say is this is let's recenter ourselves. We'll need to do this each and every meeting. There's so much to be concerned about as it relates to policing writ large and policing in Brookline. A reminder that we have a committee on police reforms that is working and doing their work on reform right now. Make sure you center yourself in the work of reimagining. There's a lot there, right? So we might say, ooh, very interested in the police complaint process, right? Well, we've got a group that's actually working on that. That's the Committee on Policing Reforms. Our work should be centered in reimagining. That's written out in the charge. We've discussed it in our meeting last week, but just a reminder for us to make sure that we stay focused on the reimagining, okay? All right, so I say we get right into it. There we go, perfect. Chief, lead us through it. I'll keep track of who may have questions and I'll call them out as I see them, but you go right ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to add one other thing to my opening comments is that we give out a lot of statistics that we've been doing since 1997. If I got into the statistics as part of this presentation, I think we'd be here forever. I think that what I'm going to ask is that Devin, when she posts this PowerPoint to the website, that we also add 2 years of our statistics on 2019 or 2018 and 2019. They're complete years of a variety of things that we do. And I just think that that would probably be the easiest way not to get bogged down today. So could I have the next slide of the table of organization? Thank you. This is the table of organization that is up to date as of this first of this month. It constantly changes. Our police department does a lot of updates and tries to make improvements as it sees how to best go about provide policing for the town. It's broken down into 4 divisions plus an administration. And if I could quickly go through those, the Board of Selectmen acts as our police commissioners. We're ultimately responsible to the citizens and the board. The Chief of Police reports to the board through the town administrator on a lot of occasions. Underneath the Chief of Police is the Superintendent of Police. In the Chief's office there, we have an administrative assistant, and we currently have a deputy superintendent assigned to there as well. Also coming under there is the Public Safety Business Office, which is 1 manager and 3 civilians, and the technology division. Technology division is staffed by 2 officers that handle our requests for video. It handles our day-to-day operations and keeping us up and running. The public safety business office, that came into effect about 2004, where we had an agreement with the town where we reduced a police captain, and we hired a civilian to run our business office, which does the budgeting, the payroll, the billing for the police department as well as the fire department. So that combined functions of the 2 public safety entities and put it under one business office. The Office of Professional Standards, which is basically our internal affairs investigator, the person that handles the civilian complaints, the person that does a lot of our inspections. Does a lot of report review. He comes, right now it's a Lieutenant Campbell. He comes under the chief's office as well. After we leave the administration, we go into the operational units, starting with the patrol division. Patrol division is our largest division. It currently has 95 officers in it. It's not fully staffed because the department is running 10 people short of its authorized strength. And in it, it has divided into 3 platoons. So we provide coverage 7 days a week, 24 hours, 365 days a year. Each platoon is headed up by a lieutenant, and each platoon has 3 sergeants. And then there's a number of patrol officers depending on day shift, which is 7:20 to 3:30. First half, which is 3:30 to 11:30, and then overnight is 11:30 to 7:20. That 10-minute difference that you see in the overnight and in the day shift is to cover school traffic posts, because we do that as well during the school year. You see 2 other lieutenants that are under patrol, which is the lodging officer and the liquor officer. That is only one of their functions. 1 day a week, a lieutenant is assigned to do liquor inspections. And 1 day a week, a lieutenant is assigned to do lodging inspections, lodging house inspections. The other 3 days of their work consist of supervising a platoon, obviously because the lieutenants don't work 7 days a week. They work a 4 or 5 day week schedule. The lodging officers are relief lieutenants as well, and they fill in on all 3 platoons. On the bottom, just to let everybody know, probably starting in 2010, 2011, we tried to develop a lot of skills within the organization. We took a look at the people that we had and their opportunities to excel in the jobs that they wanted to do, and to get them, make sure they kept interested in what they were doing. We decided to start formal units of some of the work that we were doing on a individual basis. And you'll see a special response team, you'll see a warrant unit, and you see a bicycle unit that come under patrol. You'll see some other units that we did as well. And we did that and wanted to keep in mind that we wanted to see leaders emerge in the organization. We wanted to see people end up stepping up to volunteer for these positions, and then to, if you're a supervisor or you aim to be a supervisor, that you participate in them and you show some leadership qualities that we can take a look at when we make promotions. Also coming under patrol operation is the animal control officer, which is a sworn officer. His primary job and basically his overall job is animal control. And we've had that off and on as a function of us for a lot of years. It started out as a civilian. It went into an on-duty officer. And then probably about 7 or 8 years ago, the town wanted a committed officer to run animal control, and that's what we have. It used to be under the Public Safety Dispatch Center. It used to be run by police officers in the police department, fire alarm operators in the fire department. We were separate, even though our buildings were right next door to each other. And we had to contact each other either over the radio or by telephone when there was an emergency call. Back around 2000, when we were planning the new public safety facility, we brought up, I was pushing for it, that we combine dispatch capabilities of the police, fire, and whoever served as our ambulance service. And we moved the police officers out of it. We moved the fire alarm operators over into the dispatch facility, and we staff it with fully trained civilians, including the supervisor and the dispatchers. The goal was, it was clear to me and others that dispatching was going to become a very specialized job, in that there was a lot of computer coming in. There was a lot of E911 was on the horizon. A lot of things were pointing to the fact that you couldn't put in sworn personnel on a rotating basis. It just wasn't going to be efficient. So we negotiated with the union. We built a new facility, and we have a fully operational public safety dispatch center. All E911 calls come into there, and dispatched out of that facility are calls for the fire, the police, and Fallon Ambulance, which is our current ambulance provider. And I'll move on to the investigative services, which is the detective division. We have a night detective unit, which is a smaller unit. We have a lot of detectives assigned in the daytime as well. To run it down, we have investigative supervisors, which are 2 lieutenants. One lieutenant that you see also handles our intelligence. So currently it's a man. He runs the day-to-day operations of the detective unit. When we say intelligence supervisor, we do get intelligence from other police agencies, other law enforcement agencies, and it's up to that lieutenant to vet it, and then to see if it does affect us, and who's going to be assigned to look into things. And that involves both criminal, and it could be criminal, and we have had some people that have been on a terrorist watch list. And at night, we have I think it's 4, well, I'm not exactly sure how many detectives are there at night right now, but there is a sergeant and a night lieutenant who runs the night detective division. You see the investigators are 8 detectives. We do all follow-up investigations through here. We do all major investigations. We work with other departments, the district attorney's office, and the AG's office. We currently have 1 detective assigned to the FBI. He is on computer crimes task force. He does a lot of, he gets a lot of training with the FBI, and he was asked to join that entity by the FBI when we were involved in a major fraud investigation case. So he's been there for probably a little bit over a year. Going down the side, right beside it, the court liaison officer. That is our lieutenant that's assigned to the Brookline court. As you know, court is in session Monday through Friday. He handles all our court complaints, all our scheduling for court. He handles a lot of the court hearings, and he runs the day-to-day police operations in Brookline court. We have a forensic recovery and evidence unit that is our fingerprint, our DNA investigators, fingerprint investigators, crime scene analysts. We also do our firearms licensing out of there for the town, and it's a sergeant that runs the firearm licensing as well. There is a policy and a procedure that people have to go through to get a firearms license. There's an investigation that gets done of that person's background, and we have to find out the reason for it. That's a pretty litigious group of that you have to account for in there, because a lot of people, well, a lot of people sometimes want a gun right away, and that's not necessarily how we want to do business. So we have a lot of rules in there. The rules have been gone through court cases, and the current status of the rules and regulations that we have in there have all been tested and all been upheld in courts. We have a domestic violence unit there, and it's a juvenile unit as well. And we have a detective, and there's a civilian assigned there. The civilian is a counselor. She handles a lot of our she's a victim witness advocate. She started out as a social worker that her pay was supported by a combination of the police department, school department, and in the health department. And then we were fortunate enough to get her, and she does a lot of work, not only with the victims, but also with the school. Moving over a little bit further to traffic and community safety. Traffic division handles all follow-ups into accidents. They handle a lot of citizen complaints. Citizen complaints meaning for speed in the neighborhoods, or areas where the community asked for special attention to the traffic violations in their areas, and we try to accommodate them. They also do planned enforcement efforts throughout the town. Coming under the traffic is our accident investigators. Our accident investigators have been trained in everything from minor fender benders up until fatal accidents. There's a lot of testing, a lot of courses that they have to take, and they have to be approved by the district attorney's office, and if they're going to be allowed to assist in fatal accident investigations. We also have the school safety unit under there. School safety unit is actually the crossing guards that you see, I guess, for lack of a better term. We have 11 full-time parking control officers. Those parking control officers also double as school crossing guards. And then we have 15 part-time civilian school crossing guards as well. There's a lot of school safety positions that they fill, but also when they're out of work, we don't have any extras. We will staff it with an on-duty police officer. And that's why you see a lot of police officers at someone's traffic post every now and then, and that's filling in for the parking control officers that are out. As you know, there are a lot of meters around town. We have 2 civilian meter collectors. They have a system where they go around taking the coins out of the meters. They read the meters. We bring the coins back in. They get counted in a secure room in the basement of the police station. That's under video. So everything that they collect out on the street gets brought in, locked in metal containers, brought into the meter collection, the meter counting room, not opened up until the door is shut and the cameras on, and then the collection and the counting of money starts. The coins are collected by an outside entity, probably Loomis, and they take the coins to be counted by the bank. And it's also staffed with 1 civilian manager and 3 civilians. That's the traffic unit, has those support staff. A little bit about that. They handle all of our parking ticket accountability. We run the parking tickets in that they download the information. We have a lot of handheld ticket issuing machines now, which makes it a lot easier, which takes a lot of the entry of tickets in by the support staff. So that's only one of their functions. They also handle the accident reports that come in, and they also manage our crime reporting to the state and to the federal government. And and then they handle a lot of the requests that come in for Freedom of Information Act requests. We go through them as well. And moving over finally to the final column, community service and professional development. Community service has a lot of different functions. And I'll try to go through all of them now. We moved probably in 2010. I don't say probably, in 2010, we attained certification under Massachusetts Accreditation Commission. And that showed that we had met a certain standard of policies and procedures and the things that we had, how we ran our evidence unit, how we ran our dispatch facility. And that's the first step in the accreditation process. So by attaining certification, we then move forward with accreditation. We were formally accredited in 2013. We are re-accredited in 2016, re-accredited again in 2019. So currently 1 year into newest accreditation status. Accreditation basically is when you commit to having your policies and procedures studied by an outside personnel. They make sure that we meet the standards across Massachusetts and beyond. And as long as you attain those standards and you run your business and you don't just have it in writing, but they actually test out how you go about doing your day-to-day operations. And we have to account for a lot. And then they either tell you you're accredited or you got to go back to the drawing board. Fortunately, we've been successful the last 3 times going through. Our training division also comes under there. We do a lot. We have 48 hours minimum of in-service training a year that the town has committed for a lot of years to the police department. It is more training than a lot of departments in the state and across the country. We have to meet certain training standards each year that are set by the state, such as firearm training, first aid, CPR, and training such as that. We then take it a step further and we do our own training. I'd say over the last several years and even long, well, I'd say through my career as chief, we did a lot of training in community relations. We did a lot of anti-bias training. We did a lot of training in the area of race relations, and that still continues today. I think also you see a lot of the training that we've done, especially in recent years, and it's continued up to today, is a lot of how we go about using the use of force. And a little story, just a little background. I was after Ferguson, I was part of a group of small chiefs that were asked to go to Scotland and to study how the Scottish police operate without firearms. I think about 2.5%, maybe 3% of the police of all of Scotland are armed. Everybody else only has a club, a pepper spray, and a taser and a shield. And they use a lot of de-escalation tactics. And I'd say that a vast majority of the training involved de-escalation. Now, it's true, and they're the first to tell us that it's a country that does not have a lot of firearms, but they do have a lot of substance abuse problems and a lot of fights and that result in knife fights. But they're really big on de-escalation. So when I came back, part of our charge for doing that was we had to commit to taking a look at a new way of use of force. And we did that. I sent people down to New Orleans. I sent people to DC to participate in drawing up what is a standard, I think, that's growing across the country, at least I hope it is, put on by the Police Executive Research Forum, PERF. It stresses, and we have had this in place since 2016, 2017. It stresses giving time trying to talk to people, de-escalate, and as a last resort to force. It's a different way of thinking. Yes, we all have different levels of force that we can use, but the police have a unique way in that they really force a person to think, and that's how we change. We have a decision-making model where you go into a situation and you make an assessment. You know what tools you have that you can use, but you're constantly making an assessment throughout, and you're expected, if something changes, to change with the way things are going. And a lot of times it allows for de-escalation because you're constantly making a decision. And it's really, if you think about it, it's really a simple way of doing your business that you can put into place. And I always kind of linked it to what an officer does when he or she is responding to an emergency call. You get a call from a dispatcher that there's an emergency in a part of town, you're going to it and with an increased rate of speed, but you're constantly getting information updated by the dispatcher. And the final word that you could get is that, okay, forget it. They call back, nobody's in danger, slow down. And so you do your thinking all over again. And that's really what this does. And we want the officers to think when they go on calls. So that's been going through the department. I did say de-escalation, but I do want to say that de-escalation is not new to us. We've been training de-escalation at the range for a long time. We've been training it in the police department. We've been asked to put on videos for other departments on how we go about training, how we go about our anti-bias education, and things like that. We also, out of the training division, we do our updated laws, our constitutional policing stuff. All of that will come out in type of training that's made just for the Brookline Police Department by Brookline police officers. We also have emergency management that comes under there. Emergency management is a position that probably is fairly new. I know that it really was beefed up after 9/11. And we do that, a lot of that emergency management planning and training with the fire department, the ambulance service, Fallon, the DPW, the health department. I know a lot of department heads are involved in it. We have our school education officers there that come under here, our walk and talk unit, which is officers that are assigned to the housing to work with our housing, the town's housing department. Crime analysis and community reporting come under here, which is one officer staffs that. And then we have a community service officer as well. Several years ago, we were fortunate enough to have formed a relationship with the Department of Mental Health and with NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness. And we started training our officers in more mental health classes. Everybody in the department, including dispatchers, get a 4-hour introduction into how the department wants it handled and the town wants it handled. From there, everybody gets an 8-hour in-service put on by NAMI that we do. And then we started out on a voluntary basis for officers wanting to volunteer to take the 40-hour course. And we started to get a lot of people ask for it. We started to do the 40-hour course with NAMI and with the Department of Mental Health. And then the Department of Mental Health, probably about 3 or 4 years ago, came in and asked to talk to us about us becoming a training hub and to train other departments in how we were handling the mentally ill and to give on that 8-hour session that I talked about and then that 40-hour session. So they gave us grant funding. We train all of our officers in it. We also train, put on up to six additional trainings across the state, mostly around this part of the state. But we'll go where they want us to go, and our officers will be the ones to to do that training of other departments. Somebody asked a question, how many, I know last week, how many people are in the department are certified? All of the police officers, with the exception of the last 6 that have been put on, have been fully trained in this 4-hour, 8-hour, and then 40-hour training as well. Our reason for doing that, and the national standard, what they want to get to is 25% of your department to have this type of training. We run into it a lot. We want to make sure we get it right, and we couldn't pick 25% of the department that may respond to these calls. Their calls come in all hours of the day, 7 days a week. So we made a decision to train everybody. So everybody's got the training. I mentioned the 6 that just came off of, just came out of the academy and just came off of their field training. 3 are scheduled to go in October. I think the next class that we're going to put on is in Walpole. And the final 3 are scheduled to go to the January session, and I'm not quite sure where that is. So in under that unit, which is headed up by a Lieutenant Jennifer Pastor, she's been with that with NAMI and with Department of Mental Health from the very beginning. She actually grew that division. We have a clinician that we hired with the money that DMH gave us, and she has an assistant. Some of you may have met Annabelle, who's the clinician, and Misha is her assistant as well. Annabelle does go out on mental health calls with us, our offices. So I think that's kind of where I should stop, but I should, well, before I do, I want to say one other thing. The union versus non-union. When, up until 2004, everybody in the department, with the exception of the chief, was a member of the same union. In 2004, if you remember, I mentioned that we created a public safety business office. We hired a civilian manager. We eliminated a position of captain. Part of the elimination of that captain was to create a superintendent of police who was out of the union. The superintendent of police works directly with the chief, basically does a lot of the day-to-day operations in the department. That superintendent is not a member of the union. If you go forward probably about 10 years, we made an attempt to take more people out of the union, more supervisors. So we were involved in protracted negotiations over a lot of things, but also the fact that we wanted to eventually eliminate the rank of captain and create 4 deputy positions. The 4 deputy positions are out of the union. They were appointed by the police chief. It gives the police chief, him or her, the ability to make their own command staff and work as a unit. And it doesn't beholding to civil service rules. The only civil service rules is that they retain the civil service rank. They're chosen from a group of 11 lieutenants. As I said, it's an appointed position. There's no exams given for it. And they serve at the will of the chief and eventually the town administrator and the board of selectmen. So, so currently as it stands, the deputies, the superintendent, the chief are the members of the department that are non-union. Everybody else is in the union. So I'll open for questions.
Okay, wanted to just start off, and Ann, I see in there, hang tight for just a second. We could spend the entire meeting and probably a lot more than just this meeting just on this one slide. I think maybe it's more of a request than a question. I think one of the things as I look through this that I think we're going to need is probably for each, maybe not each bubble, but certainly for many of the bubbles here. I think a question that keeps coming up in my mind is what is the objective this particular role? You know, what is the objective of the animal control officer? What is the objective of school education officers? You know, what are the objectives of some of these other offices and individuals? And, you know, a related question is, what community needs does this position meet? So, ideally, we create positions based on needs in the community. And so I think we should be able to say that this position exists because of this community need. And I want to see if we have more information, more data around how do we know that those community needs exist or still exist. They may have been needs that were needs some time ago. So just a little bit more around that. And then also we've got the objective, you know, there might be a worthy objective, but how do we know that this particular role is addressing, is meeting that need or that objective? Those are questions I have. And like I said, we'd need to go through so many positions right now. I think it might be more helpful, Chief, if, and I'm not asking for it to be buried in job descriptions, because I know that's the, you know, just like, let's pull all the job descriptions and send them off to the task force. You know, I'd really love just something that's about a paragraph or so for each of these positions that would answer those questions. This is the role. This is the community need that it addresses. Here are the objectives of that particular role. And here's the evidence we have that that particular role is meeting those objectives. So maybe less of a question and more of a request for a future meeting. I'm gonna.
Future
Is
meeting.
that? Sorry, say it again. Sorry.
I'm glad you said future meeting.
Yes. No, not right now. But we do have others with their hands raised. I saw Ann first, so Ann, go on ahead.
Yep. Hi. Thank you for the overview, Chief OLeary, or Mr. OLeary. Do I call you Chief still? I'm not sure.
Whatever you prefer.
I have just two very quick questions. You said at one point that the officers use a decision-making model on use of force. I'm wondering if we could see that, if that would be available.
Yes, did you get a copy of our use of force policy? It's in the use of force policy.
Oh, okay. So like, I was thinking there was like some decision tree type.
It's a circle that's constantly being assessed, and it's on the bottom of the second page.
Okay, thank you.
And
And my other question is, when you talk about the NAMI model, are you talking about mental health first aid, or are you talking about a different training model? I'd like to know more specifically what the officers are trained in.
the mental health first aid was that 8-hour session that we gave, but then they have a more extensive 40-hour training, and we did do that as well. We can get you the curriculum of that.
I've done the curriculum. I just wanted to know, is that what it is? Is CIT also used? Is that a different training model that?
No, that's just what it's been named as like it's just an acronym for the name that we have. So CIT is the same type of thing, but
okay, they're different training models, but yeah.
Well, there are two. The mental health first aid is the 8-hour. That's a basic one. Then we go to the more extensive one, which is the CIT, which is the training. Then the 40 hours that are done. I just had a thought, but I think I kind of lost it.
Okay, so they get trained in the mental health first aid, the 8-hour, and then there is also a 40-hour mental health first aid, but they switch to the CIT model.
Which is done, everybody in the department has up to the 40 hours with the exception of those 6.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. Chi-Chi.
Hi, thank you. And thank you, Chief OLeary, for this presentation. I had a couple of questions. The first is, you talked a lot about trainings in general, and with the NAMI training, you emphasized how each staff member gets that training. I'm wondering whether the same holds true for some of the other trainings, such as the anti-bias training or the de-escalation training that you implemented after the visit to Scotland? And then related to that, what is the turnover on your force?
Okay, all officers undergo the training that we select for the town of Brookline. All the anti-bias training, everybody has gone through it. Now, our anti-bias training, for a lot of years, we've been talking about community relations. We've been training on anti-bias training, unconscious bias. All of that have been regularly throughout our training throughout the past 20 or so years, even beyond that. So it's hit a lot of offices. In-service is a requirement. Officers cannot choose not to come to in-service training. They are subject to discipline if they do not come to training. So everybody knows that you come to these 48 hours, you put everything aside. When you get assigned to go to these trainings, you have to go to them. So everybody does it. It's very well, we try to make it more than just a lecture, in that a lot of it is interactions. Some of it is role playing, but everybody undergoes the training. The turnover, it's hard to say. There's a lot of, recently there's been a lot of turnover, but turnover is good, actually. People choose to retire or to leave for different reasons, and then we have to go and fill it. The hard part is filling it, because it takes a long time to get a person hired through the civil service system. But I can't really say how many officers leave every year, because it's different, it fluctuates.
So my second question is, this structure, and you can answer after the next slide maybe, but this structure and the staffing levels, how do they compare to cities and towns of comparable size in Massachusetts, such as like Weymouth or Malden, which have similar populations to Brookline?
I'm not sure of those particular towns, but I know that I was a member of a group as a chief, major cities chiefs, and they were all had to be at least 75 sworn officers, and both of those departments were members of it. So we have 138 slots that could be sworn police officers from the chief on down. So I would say that we're pretty comparable to at least Weymouth, but I don't know the exact numbers. I'd have to look those. You just got to remember where we're situated in Brookline. We're 6.8, 6.9 square miles. We're surrounded three sides by a city. Boston is three sides by a city, and just over the BU Bridge is Cambridge, another city. So there's a lot of things that we have that maybe some of these other cities and towns don't have. So it's hard. I'm glad you picked two other cities, but I know that a lot of times during negotiations, people try to compare you to, like Wellesley or something like that, and totally different communities just based on our geographics. So.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd like next week also for us to start digging into this we talked about last week, which is calls for service, and also the crime rate here, and to better understand once again, and let's get into it next week. But as I see the number of detectives we have, it raised the question in my mind. That's a lot of detectives, it seems to me, which theoretically would be sort of running down a lot of crimes that are taking place in Brookline. That's certainly not been my Brookline experience, is seeing a lot of crime happening here, but I'd love to look at the data, and we can get into that next week. Almas.
So my question was partially answered by Chichi's question, but I just wanted to add a little bit more to that regarding the training for racial bias. And thank you, Chief OLeary, for telling us about some of that training. I guess I was trying to find out if there's anything written up about that specific training, because I couldn't find it on the Town of Brookline Police website. So if this is something that we could get, like the specific objectives, who is doing the training? Like, I'd really like to know that, because it's just important, because, there's so many different types of training that can be done, and some training is deeper than others. So I'd like to see the objectives. You already talked about, like, I think you said 48 hours of training, and that there was from what I heard, there was some inconsistency, like, so it would be nice to know, like, how many people have had it, how many still need it, and how often? Is it every year? Is it, it's just the first time that they join the police force? So I think just to see something, if there's something in writing about all that training, it would be great to see that.
Okay.
Great. Mike.
Needed to unmute, thanks. So I have a couple of of questions about training of us, in a sense. I'm wondering whether it would be possible for each member of the task force to spend a day with a patrol officer, and whether it might be possible to sit in on a day of the mental health training. Particularly, I think that would be interesting for the mental health professionals on the task force, but perhaps for others as well.
I think that'd be a great idea. And we could arrange that.
Okay.
Thanks, Mike. Eitan.
Yes, thank you for the presentation, Chief OLeary. Can I ask who in the org chart here, is it just the chief or the superintendent or the operations deputy superintendents who kind of have long-term planning, department culture as part of their jobs, who convenes officers or groups of officers to talk about the mission of the department, how it's working, how internal to the department, who is in kind of any role that has that kind of mandate?
I think what we try to instill in the members of the department is that when we encourage people to speak their minds, we encourage people to bring up ideas. I think some of these units that we started, when I briefly mentioned them, like the bike unit, the warrant unit, stuff like that, that really morphed up from the officers themselves asking for this stuff. A lot of the in-service training we do, we get input from the officers on how it's being done, what they'd like to see, and I think you get a lot of good training. I'll give you an example. We did a bias training where we took the officers off-site up to Pine Manor, and they underwent a training curriculum that actually was given to the ADL, because they asked for the training to use it as part of their bias, and we gave the curriculum to them. We ran part of it with Cambridge Police, part of it we ran on our own, but part of it was interaction with the officers, and they brought suggestions to the fore. They brought suggestions on how they thought changes should be made in the department. And one of the big things is that they asked for more leeway in how to conduct traffic enforcement. And in particular, how to handle vehicles that are unregistered and uninsured, or just either one. And our policy up until probably 4 years ago, if not longer, was that if you have an uninsured or an unregistered car on the roadway, it gets towed. They asked for more leeway. They did not want to keep towing people's cars, so we changed that. They asked for leeway on handling suspended or revoked driver's licenses. We did lighten that up. We told them that they just do a driver's history on somebody, and if it's for failure to pay a fine, they can be summoned into court. There's no need to make an arrest. But if somebody has their license revoked or suspended for driving under and for not showing up, then that's a different story. So stuff like that came up. I thought was very forward thinking. officers themselves ask for those changes. So that's what we try to encourage, is anyone that stands and does long-term training, I think it's a little bit of everybody. Again, the rank of deputy, the rank of lieutenant or sergeant, or even some of the patrol officers that want to progress, you know, a large part of that is showing leadership qualities, and that's what we want to see and want to encourage.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any more questions from task force members. We're not taking public comment at this meeting, but I do see that Bernard Green, Select Board Chair and Chair of the Committee on Policing Reforms, has had his hand raised for a while. So Devin, if we can just bring him in to see what is going on with Chair Green, that'd be great. Devin, you with us?
Yeah, sorry. It's difficult to run the PowerPoint and manage the Zoom at the same time.
Okay.
I'm gonna grab Bernard.
And after doing that, if you can make me a co-host, I'm happy to share the load.
Yes.
You can help with that. Yeah. Bernard, I think you're with us now.
I am. That I did not have a question. I may have inadvertently clicked the hand symbol. So
Jeez,
I'm just listening. Very interesting.
All right, great. Talk to you soon. All right, back into it. As a reminder, you know, as we move forward, I do want, Chief, if we can move through this next set a little bit more, you know, I know these are areas of great interest. I do just want to remind us about the work around reimagining. What we're talking about here is what are the community concerns and how can those community concerns be best met? Are there ways to meet those concerns without the deployment of armed officers or police officers at all? Are meeting those objectives? Is it better to meet those objectives in other ways? Those are essential questions here. Everything else, very interesting, you know, very important, even critical. That's why we have an entire committee on policing reforms focusing on some of those specifics. But I just want to recenter us around the idea of reimagining. And for us, you know, I just don't want to chase every lead that there is out there. So let's get back to it. Chief, if we can maybe, I want to make sure we have enough time to cover some of the other work that we have going. So if we can move a little bit more quickly through these slides, that'd be great.
Sure. I'll combine a couple together because it's probably the better way to do it on this one. This is our current staffing levels. We have 138 sworn positions, like I said, 128. The rest kind of speaks for itself. And I just want to point out our diversity. As with the whole department, things change during the year, people retire and go, but that's our current, the department's current breakdown of females, Black or African Americans, Asians, and Latinx. I think just so if somebody's doing the math, out of those 15 females, one is Black and one's Latinx, and they're kind of double counted there. Okay, so it's those 15 females are also in these other categories. So as far as, well, I'll get to the next slide if I could.
Well, Mike, I do see a hand up from Mike Salmon. Do you have a question, Mike?
Yeah, this is something you probably want to, we probably want to come back to at a later time, but picking up from your question, Raul, Chief, you spent some time looking at the Scottish police force and recognizing that not many people in Scotland are carrying weapons. The police department, you said, has very, very few people, and that's been a pattern in Great Britain ever since I've been reading about Great Britain. I wonder if at some point you could tell us a little bit about what you've learned there and what might be applicable here, because certainly carrying weapons is one of the key questions that we're asking ourselves about.
Do you want me to take a crack at it now? Sure. All right. First of all, I don't think we can go without firearms, if that's what the question that you're asking. I think that there have been a number of firearm arrests in Brookline. I also think that if you just take a look at what's happening around our borders, I don't think it would increase safety at all to take a firearm away. I think that's why we do a lot of training. I think that's why we do a lot of de-escalation training. We do a lot of role playing and a lot of scenario-based training, not just shooting at targets. And that's just the culture that is in this country. And I don't think that's a good thing. Scotland, they really impressed upon talk. They wanted conversations. They wanted officers to build a rapport with whoever they were interacting with. You know, they insisted on people that could actually, I'll tell you, the first impression that I had when I got picked up at the airport, I got picked up by this person who had served time in the military. Now he was one of their firearm carrying officers. And my opinion, he was very well squared away. But he told me, he said, this is what's going to happen. You'll be staying in the police academy, which was actually an old castle, actually. But and the police academy has an academy class going through it. We expect every one of those cadets to say hello to you, to hold the door for you, to engage you in conversation. And I said, wow, that's different from the United States. United States, you know, you're required to step aside and salute and everything else. And they said, well, we want our officers to talk to people. We don't want them to salute people and such as that. They also had a lot of police officers that were tattooed. Now you see the American policing just accepting tattoos because you're eliminating a lot of good candidates. So some things that they were doing, we should be doing more of, and talking to people and explaining to people, explaining the actions, why police take the actions they do. People don't have to agree with the outcomes, but it's really important that they understand why a police officer is doing what he or she is doing. And I think those are the key takeaways I took out of Scotland.
Kristen?
Hi, thank you. Again, thank you for the presentation. I just want to jump in on this thread of conversation about Scotland. I'm just very wary the degree to which we start elevating something as a model for us to start thinking about applying. It's a very homogenous country, has a very different history, a very different population. And I think it is a bit of a leap too far for us to then start thinking about what might be applicable for us and here, given just the vastly different histories, demographics, things like that. So I'm just a bit mindful of us coming to any conclusions about what's applicable in other communities too soon.
Fair enough. All right, let's continue on.
Okay, could we go to the next? This is the hiring process. I think that's important. And just to get off this slide for a minute, we're a civil service department, which is a lot of it is exam based for both hiring and promoting. But in order to hire, people have to take a civil service exam. They're given every 2 years. I don't know if that's going to be the same this year. I know there's usually one scheduled for next year. It's the odd year, but none is scheduled, and they're backlogged because of COVID. So I don't know. It'd be very disadvantageous not to have an exam. But so people have to take the civil service test. We do a lot of community outreach. Here's some of the stuff here. that we do, and we try to get as many people as we can. We are a residence preference community, and I can get into that in a little bit, but residence preference, after you go through, residence preference actually gives the residents of Brookline that have lived in the town 1 year prior to taking the test, that gives them a higher place on the list than for people, say, from outside of Brookline. And by outside, but it's not unusual to be a residence preference town. I think the vast majority of civil service communities in Massachusetts do have their residency preference, because they give the people that live and grow up in the town, or move to the town, a leg up on people from other parts of the state. So the way it works is, if you're a resident of the town a year prior to taking the test, the veterans go first. The disabled veterans top the list. The veterans regular veterans, not disabled, come in right under them. Then there's a clause in there that and this applies to anybody that puts Brookline as a community that they want to be considered to be hired, if they've had a family member killed in the line of duty as a police officer, or severely disabled based on, say a shooting incident, civil service gives them priority. We've had some of those family members appear on our list. None of them ever actually went through the hiring process with us. So after you go through your resident disabled veterans, your resident veterans, then you hit the residency list, which is anybody that in Brookline that has met that qualification of a year prior to taking the test, and they've passed the test, which is a score of 70 or above on the civil service test. So after that list gets expanded, then it opens to the statewide test, which is non-resident disabled vets, non-resident veterans, and then non-residents. And that's open across the state. Anybody that wants to eventually move to the town, you have to move within, I think it's a 10-mile radius, as within 9 months of getting hired. So, so that's the priority list on hiring. I did put in the talking points at a selective list. And to explain that, when I became chief, we were under a consent decree. And the consent decree was from a court case that didn't involve Brookline, but because I think it was because we were of our size, we were drawn into it. So what that meant is that you got a list from civil service that was a minority candidate, and then 3 of residents, and then a minority candidate and 3 of residents. And that's how you went through your hiring. We did that hiring the first 8 or 10 years of my tenure as chief. And then there was an affirmative action case in Boston that threw that out, said that could no longer be followed. And there was an exception. So I applied for the exception. We wanted to continue to hire our officers in that manner, because it gave us more diversity, it gave us more people to choose from, and that's what we wanted to do. So I did that, I think, on 1 hiring, and then the lawyers called me in and said that has to stop, that we can no longer hire like that. We are subjecting the town to a possible suit by people that didn't get the job. So we had to stop that. So during that time, we had also asked for people who spoke Russian. We asked for people who just were Russian, spoke Spanish, or were African American. We asked for a specific list of people we wanted to hire. We had to stop that too. We had to stop that too because, as you saw from our numbers, even though we have 8, for instance, African American, we have 8 African Americans That's about 6.5% of our department. I think the town on the 2010 census was 3.2 African-American. So we're above what the town has. So we cannot ask for a selective list. So we can't ask for Spanish speaking because we have more Spanish speaking on our department, even though it's only like, I don't know, well, it's 11 people, so 8.5%, 9% maybe, but that's higher than what the town has. So we can't exceed that limit unless we meet all sorts of standards, which we're not going to be able to make. So, so we had to stop that as well. So that's why we do a lot of community outreach. We do a lot of recruiting, and that's how we do our hiring now. This past hiring cycle, where I think it was 9 candidates, no, 2 cycles ago, which were 9 candidates, were actually all non-resident disabled veterans and veterans, because we had exhausted the residence list. We exhausted everybody that was in town that wanted it or qualified for it. And then they hired 9 or 10, I'm not exactly sure which, I wasn't chief then, of the state, from the statewide list, but it never got out of disabled veterans and veteran status. So,
Chief, just mindful of the time right now. We've got at least one member with their hand up. I'll just say briefly that that a reconsideration of our engagement in the civil service process as the town of Brookline, and particularly as it relates to police department, is something that a number of board members, including myself, select board members, including myself, have called for, and I believe that's going to be addressed through the Committee on Policing Reforms, if not by the board itself. Malcolm.
Yeah, and I'm going to apologize. My internet is acting a little funky if I go out or something. But you know, numbers are numbers, and they're always a little funky. And I hear what Chief OLeary is saying around you know, in relation to population. But there are the population that I don't know that fits civil service. So while it's true, like the town population for African American and Latinx is a little under 4. That's not true for the schools, particularly when you include programs like METCO and Materials Free Kids and those families. I would also say we're significantly lower the town residency for Asians. And I think one thing I would ask for some clarity, like when I see 15 women, I don't actually know what that means. Like I don't know what that means in comparison to other police forces. You know what I mean? Like, you know, educator, I work in a world where there tends to be more women than men. And so, you know, with a raw number looking at it, like it might actually look as if we do well in hiring. That I would say isn't exactly the case for public schools, Brookline, but yes, on that. And then I'm also curious, diversity comes in a lot of forms. I know there's things that legally people can't ask. But I wonder if there's other forms of diversity that the police department has thought about in terms of sharing what it means to be diverse.
I can try to answer the question. And we do go, our diversity does go beyond just race and color. We reflect the community. An example, if for those of us that remember when marriage was allowed, gay marriages was allowed, the first couple that got married in Cambridge, one of those partners was a former detective of ours. So yeah, we do take into consideration, or we don't take into consideration, but we do accept all types of diversity. Your question about the schools and the METCO program, I agree with what you're saying totally. I don't know if you remember, but probably a good 10 years ago, maybe longer, I appeared in front of the town meeting, And we asked to change the definition of what it meant to be a residence. I approached and asked the town meeting members to approve a home rule petition that extended residence preference to up to 10 years from graduating from Brookline High School. Now that took in not only METCO students, but it also took in a lot of students that went away to college and maybe lived somewhere else, but decided to want to be a police officer and they could not move back into Brookline. So that solved a lot of issues we're having about losing quality candidates. Overwhelmingly, and I think there was only like 6 people that voted against it in town meeting. Overwhelmingly, that got approved, and it died at the State House. They did not allow us to get that law passed. So we tried, and it got defeated. It didn't even get up to a vote, I don't think, out of the State House. So,
well, I think what I'm saying is, like, you can look at racial diversity in comparison to the town, but I think there's other entities you might say police, aren't necessarily meeting the racial diversity compared to other institutions within the town. Like, you can say that with residents perhaps, but not necessarily other institutions.
Well, I agree with you. That's true. I mean, I use that analogy all the time when we're talking about traffic stops, but by the same token, we're under civil service rules and they're not going to bend those rules for us. So that's a good reason why the other committee is looking at the role of civil service in hiring for police and fire. Police anyway.
All right.
I'm not going to dispute that.
Chief, what I'm going to ask you to do is wrap up this presentation by 9:30. So I encourage you to burn through these next slides and we'll take any questions folks have at the end.
Okay. Well, the slides, if people read it when it came out last night, they kind of speak for themselves here. This is on our hiring process here a little bit more that we do beyond the list. We do backgrounds and everything. This is a picture of the last 6 that were hired that graduated and just got off their field training program, and they're out on their shifts right now. So that was the promotional process. Our promotional process is a little bit different. I'll only talk to the dissimilarities. We negotiated with the union to include our policies and procedures as part of the promotions to sergeant and lieutenant. That's more than 98% of the state has on their exams. We pay extra for it for the civil service, but they do take some of our policies that are very important that we flag for the civil service, and they formulate questions from them and they extend the exam to our sergeants and lieutenants. And then when we promote, we get a list of candidates that are eligible. We can choose within a range based on the officer's quality of work he or she does in the police department. If they're tied, they all if everyone comes up with the same, say 97, there's 3 candidates at 97, they're all considered the same. You can select any one of those 3. Otherwise, if you go over somebody that's higher, you just have to prove your case as to why you're doing it. You write it up, and we've done that as well. We do take into consideration a person's career, what they've done, what they've volunteered for, how they've handled things, the number of complaints against them, the number of sick leave they use, and things like that. It all comes part of they're analyzed before they get promoted. Here's just, we jumped ahead to some pictures on training that our officers undergo. And do you want to go to the next slide? little bit of the accountability that we have. I talked a little bit about accreditation earlier. The select board and the town administrator, they approve our policies and procedures. They check our civilian complaints. They review the outcomes of those. They run, you know, they're responsible for being police commissioners, and they have to perform that function. The complaint procedure, after the citizen complaint, after the complaints are investigated, they go through a report review within the department. Then it goes to the town administrator. Our complaint procedure, I think, is very transparent. We give the complaint and the investigative report minus the redactions that we got to take to both the officer complained about and the complainant, and they can comment and they can write comments back to me, or I take that back, to the chief, if they feel that the investigation has not been completed or they have other evidence to give. We have a report review process throughout the department. It's stricter for some very delicate or dangerous things that we do, like use of force. A use of force, I'll go as an example. If a use of force, the way we handle it's defined in the Brookline Police Department, is anything more than compliant handcuffing. So if you have to force somebody on the ground and you take them into custody, that's use of force. If you pull your firearm and you point it at somebody, that's a use of force. A lot of departments don't go to that extent, but we do. The use of force, when the officer identifies it, the sergeant identifies it that was on the call, the sergeant has to do an investigation that night to see if procedure was complied with. The report does not get reviewed until there's a box that gets checked on the outside of the report. It says it's a use of force, so it gets flagged throughout the department. It goes to the sergeant who has to do his or her investigation. Then it goes to the lieutenant, who has to go through his or her investigation. Then it goes to internal affairs and the deputy overseeing that division, and finally to the superintendent and the chief. So there's a whole review that goes in. And we also, this is part of our statistics that we put online that you'll see in those two reports that are going to get put up. We do inspections within the department that are both announced and unannounced, especially in our evidence room. The town and the union collective bargaining agreements, there's not a lot in there that restricts the police department from doing things, but there are rules that we have to follow with the collective bargaining agreement. The minute you come near the police station, you're under camera. Those cameras are viewed, and they're all throughout the building. We have them in critical areas to include the evidence room, the money counting room that I talked to you about, the booking room. As soon as a prisoner gets brought into the back of the station is fully videoed. They go into the bay area. The garage door is shut. Cameras are on. You're on the camera throughout your booking and placed in a cell. Cells are all have cameras, and there's a requirement for the house officer to check the prisoner in every 20 minutes. And then the body worn cameras and the dashboard cameras are in discussion with the union as part of the collective bargaining. So these are just a couple of agreements that we have. We have a mutual aid agreement that all departments have throughout the state. We're members of the UASI, which is the Urban Area Security Initiative, the Greater Boston, that we've been part of since 2003 when it started. And something that's unique to Brookline, Boston, and Cambridge, Brookline, Boston, and Newton is we share 500 yards into each other's jurisdiction. That's because parts of Brookline, homes in Brookline are cut in half. Part are in Brookline, part are in Boston. It used to be the Circle Theater, now is the hotel. Part of that is in Brookline, part is in Boston. And it stemmed from the first version of the 500-yard rule, stemmed from a murder that was committed on Beacon Street up, I think around Englewood Ave, where a Boston officer was doing a detail in Cleveland Circle, but only called to call in about a fight, didn't go up because it had no authority to come into Brookline. Result of that fight was a stabbing, and kid was killed. Several Brookline residents were arrested for it. The leaders of the departments at the time thought that that was a bad way to do business, so they shared the 500 rule. We updated it in 1998 to more accurately reflect what was going on. Basically, traffic enforcement was no longer it was a civil infraction for the most part. It was no longer a criminal stop. So we had to update the law to comply with that. And that's it. I hope I'm a couple of minutes to spare.
You're there, right on time. We can go ahead and end the screen sharing. Thanks, Devin. So I know there's a couple of board members with questions. Let's get to those. I want to be mindful. I want to save about 10 minutes for a discussion at the end about this potential joint public hearing with the Committee on Police Reforms. Let's get into folks with questions though. Eitan, I see you.
Yes, quick question, Chief. In terms of private armed security in Brookline, does the police department oversee that, have a clear sense of where there are private armed security in the town? And what kind of oversight process is there?
We do not have oversight of other departments and private security. For the most part, most private security that are armed, if they come into town, they would stop in and talk to us. We do have, I think there's 4 different consuls that are in town. We do regularly interact with the people in those consuls, so we know them personally. And off the top of my head, it's like the Israeli consul is there, the Japanese, Turkish, and there's one other, I'm not sure. There are other police agencies that drive through town. BU police can go where their properties are throughout the town. BC comes in town. Northeastern used to be Wheelock, but now it's part of BU. The Longwood
Like a
Medical.
bank security guard or something like that, they don't have to get any kind of permit from you.
No, they do not. But they have to, I mean, it's up to their company to make sure that they're licensed.
Interesting. Chi-Chi.
Okay. Thanks, Raul. Chief OLeary, I wanted to follow up on a few things, requests or raise issues that you may not have the answer to off the top of your head right now. Number one, my question about turnovers, if we could get some data on that.
Okay.
What the attrition is like every year. A question that you probably don't know the answer to, and maybe nobody does, but I think would be good to know is there's been a discussion of the barriers posed by civil service. If we were to, for example, to start hiring social workers or mental health counselors, would they be subject to civil service rules as well? Would we have an issue there?
I don't really know the answer to it, but off the top of my head, I'd say no.
It's a no.
So
It's a no.
Okay. And then the last point I wanted to reiterate to follow up on what Malcolm Cawthorn said or asked is, with respect to the Asian population, we don't have a police force that includes Asians comparable to our population, and whether there's been any consideration of that.
I don't know about recent conversation on it, so I do not know that.
Important questions. Thanks, Chi-Chi. I wanted, before Malcolm jumps in here, just to mention, before I forget, 2 things that were at the end of the presentation. The complaint review process and civilian oversight, that's something that is undergoing review right now through the Committee on Police Reforms. And then mutual aid is another thing that certainly I and other board members have asked for more information and review on in terms of the mutual aid agreements that we enter into. I know that that certainly some of us were disturbed about two things. One is those Norfolk Sheriff's officers that were in Brookline in riot gear with no insignias or patches on that responded to a peaceful protest here in our town, as well as our officers being dispatched to engage with peaceful protesters in Boston primarily, and under the command of Boston Police Department, not under command of our own police department or our own civilian structure. So those are things that warrant review as well by the Committee on Police Reforms. Malcolm.
Hi, my question is about the background checks. There's lots of forms of background checks. I tend to think of them as usually criminal and financial. I'm wondering if for police that also includes things like psychological, as well as internet footprint, particularly like social media posts and social media followings. If police are, say, following certain groups, websites, and other things of that nature.
The answer to that question is yes. We have investigated candidates' footprint on the computer, and we have used information that we found there to deny hiring them. Your first question on psychological, that's part of the hiring process. We can't do that until they get to a certain extent in the hiring process. They have to be offered a conditional offer of employment, and then they go through the psychological, which is a written and a one-on-one interview with the psychiatrist.
Anne, I see you.
Hi, I just wanted to add information. So part of the hiring process is done through Human Resources. And after the finalists are selected, the HR department handles the psychological exam, and we have on contract a psychiatrist who does a written exam and then an interview with each of the candidates as part of the process. And the information that is provided as part of the application is reviewed with the candidate, and the questions are asked regarding their psychological fitness. So that is done independent of the town and the department. So they get, the department doesn't get the detailed psychological review. They get whether the candidate has passed or has not passed the psychological review.
Is that the same? Is that the same for internet footprint?
The internet footprint is part of the initial investigation that's done by the background crew in the department before they get to the psychological investigation. So all of that is part of it. It's part of the interview process and the background review. And then that information, all of that background information is given to the psychiatrist for the interview.
Other questions? Okay. So I've got, my next question for you all as a task force is, what information do you need for us to move forward? I'll just share a little bit about what I shared before, but just to reiterate, one, looking at the particular roles that we have here on the organizational chart, and trying to, what I'd like to see is a brief breakdown. Again, not I don't want to get flooded with job descriptions, but let me take an example here. The school education officers, or rather, the walk and talk unit, those officers. Take the walk and talk unit and say, the objectives of the walk and talk unit are, and of course, those objectives should be rooted in community concerns, right? I would imagine. So the objectives of the walk and talk officers are, we have X number of officers assigned to that job. Here's what they do. So, you know, what do they actually do? What is their role? So in other words, how are they working to meet those objectives? And then, of course, what evidence, what assessment, what evidence do we have that they're actually meeting the objectives that have been laid out for that particular role? So I'd like that for, you know, I would say for the walk and talk unit, for the school education officers, you know, for the patrol officers as well, for CIT, you know, for any number of these. If there are others that people are interested in learning about, I think that'd be great. The second of three things that I'm very interested in, I mentioned before, I know you're probably already working on, are the calls for service, 911 calls, and if there are direct calls to the police department that are logged, to know what our community is saying they need through these phone calls. What are they reaching out and saying, I need help or support with this, to better understand that, and including all relevant data. I mean, this is one area where I'd like to first see the trove of data, de-anonymized, of course. We don't need anyone's names, who's calling, right? We don't need any of that kind of stuff. We didn't know what calls were placed, what the need was, and what our response was, I think is really important as well. Did we send an officer out? Did we address it in some other way? And then the third thing is a better understanding of crime data. There's a lot of, you know, I heard a lot today about sort of where we're situated, and because we're, you know, bordered by Boston on three sides and things of that nature. I'd like to actually better understand what kind of crime we have, so that we can, this task force can determine whether or not we think we need a force of this size to address the crime that may be being committed within our borders. And I'll stop there. I see a number of hands. I see Kristen first.
Thanks, Rahul. I think I just wanted to build off some of the points that I think I hear you making. If you take a look on the Town of Brookline's website for the financial plan, the complete financial plan for 2020, each of the departments has objectives laid out. There's ostensibly objectives of what we are trying to accomplish in public safety. And in public safety, we are defining that as buildings, fire, and police. Right now, we're having a conversation that's only about one portion of what ostensibly we say is public safety. But then there are objectives that are listed in the town's budget, or at least in that document, about ostensibly what those objectives are. And I think for us to be mindful of not boiling the ocean in our abilities to try to get into data, it may be worth it for us to reckon a bit with, these are the objectives that we've laid out for the community, and then the degree to which we say this is what we're trying to accomplish with schools and with a number of these units, in some respects, should be embedded in that document, and it may be conspicuous that they aren't embedded in that document. And that may be a point of entry for us to consider at least some of how we've decided public safety is supposed to be defined for the town.
Thanks, Kristen. Chi-Chi.
Hi, thanks, Raul. Since we're talking data request and reiterating some, you know, following up on your point in terms of metrics as to the appropriateness of size of the police force, you know, if we could get some data not only on the crime statistics, but, you know, my question before about comparable size towns and cities, both within Massachusetts, and if there are any literature about, or any academic research about what is an appropriate size of the police force given the size of the population and the crime statistics. And then just to reiterate the request for statistics on attrition, so that, you know, if we really are thinking about having different roles fulfilled by different types of professionals, whether, you know, attrition is going to play a part of that, you know, filling open spots with someone else instead of a police officer.
If I could say something just quickly, the TAB did an article back in July on, it's called "How Does Brookline's Policing Stack Up?" Take a look at the numbers. So you might want to take a quick look at that. They do compare, do some comparisons as part of their article.
Okay, thank you. I have to get past the TAB paywall first. I'm having serious problems with that.
I'm going to bring in, we haven't heard from Bonnie today, so I'm going to bring Bonnie up. Go for it.
Hi, I'm curious about what the relationship is with mental health institutions outside of officer training. Like beyond, so an officer has an interaction with someone having a mental health emergency, they deal with that person in one way or another. Is there interaction with other institutions? I'm not, only because I don't know other ones, perhaps the Brookline Center or something like that, or does that not really exist? Or do they have a relationship with the Brookline Police Department?
Yes,
Direct?
we have a relationship, a good relationship with the Brookline Center, but also with the BEST program, which is out of the hospitals in Longwood Medical area. One thing that we did over recent years is that when we interact with a person that's struggling and has to be hospitalized, we make it a requirement that the officer that responded to the call will meet with the physician that, or the psychologist or psychiatrist that's going to be helping the person we bring to the hospital, so that they know, instead of getting it third hand, they get it directly from the officer that was at the call, and probably the ambulance personnel as well. So there is a relationship. We do follow-ups. Part of the core group of all of the officers is people that are very interested, members of the department, and they are part of a follow-up team that goes back to visit these people that were struggling and try to build a relationship with them when they're in a better frame of mind. So it's a well-rounded program.
I'm less worried about the relationship between the officer and the person having a crisis, and more interested in if there are very direct relationships between the Brookline Police Department and a mental health institution or hospital. And if one triggers into the other, if there's a mental health crisis happening in a mental health facility, does that trigger bringing police officers in from the Brookline Police Department and vice versa?
Yes, we've been called on a number of occasions to Bournewood, to the Arbor House, to deal with unruly patients and or people that have walked away or were committed and then climbed out. I know that we have a lot of interactions that way with them, but we also have a lot of just day-to-day conversations or day-to-day talking to people of institutions as well. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but there are a lot of group homes in Brookline as well. It's not just those two major hospitals. You know, we have, I don't know the best way to put it, but we have interacted with them, and we are aware of them, and we help them out when we can.
I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty even being specific with my own question, because I'm kind of thinking as I'm going along here. But is there something specific that might happen, say, in one of those group homes that would force them to call the police department? Like, are there regulations that, like, if A, B, and C happen, then you call the officers?
We normally get called if there's somebody that is acting up and is not becoming unruly and can't be handled by the staff. Mm-hmm. They would call the police.
So what I'd like to do is actually, I think I'm very interested in hearing from the civilian social worker at the police department who Chief, you mentioned, goes on some of these calls or and is tasked with supporting this work. So I think we should certainly have them come into this space and share, you know, because I think there are lots of I think that's one area that that a lot of members of the public are concerned about is mental health calls, and I think there's a lot that we need to dig into there. So I'm going to go ahead and recommend that we set aside probably a meeting to dig into that information. Yeah.
Actually, if I could say, they are very interested, both Annabelle and Lieutenant Pastor. They're both very interested in appearing in front of the committee. So they've already expressed that to me.
Great. We may also need, we haven't gotten to this yet, but we may also need a subcommittee to dig into that a bit.
Good.
Mel?
I was just gonna add briefly that the town has direct and formal relationships, contractual relationships with the Brookline Community Mental Health Center. It's an outstanding community mental health center, one of the best I've seen. I think the input directly from them would be very useful, I think, to this group.
Same. Let's go, Mike.
Yeah, thanks. You know, I have shifting gears a little bit, although what we've just been discussing is very interesting to me. Shifting gears a little bit, Brookline's dispatch number gets something over 100,000 calls a year, which seems like it's out of scale with other communities based on numbers that I've looked at. And it would be really interesting. The question's been asked before about, well, you know, what are some of those calls about? What are people calling about? But that's like 2 calls for every man, woman, and child in the town every year, which seems like a lot. So it'd be really interesting to hear some detail around the categories and what kinds of things actually relate to police matters versus something else.
I agree. Ann, and we're at 9:50 now, so if I can ask you to make it quick, that'd be great.
Very quick. I'm also very interested in what Bonnie was bringing up, and I'm also interested in how the decisions get made on those calls with somebody who's experiencing emotional distress, how the decision gets made to bring them to a hospital. I'm also very interested in how defining unruly gets made. What's the definition of the word unruly when it's applied to folks either in group homes or on the street or in any contexts that the police get involved in? Thanks.
So let's do this. I think all hands are down. Yeah. Okay. Let's do this for next week. Tell me if there's any objection. Chief, I mentioned this last week. Do you think we're ready now? By next week, we'll be able to have the dispatch data and calls for service, like direct calls for service to the department that may have been logged, to be able to look at those data?
Yeah, I'll try. Just I'll try to get it. Yes, I know. I just basically got the number of 911 calls that we got the last 2 years, but I'll see if we can break it down even more so.
Yeah. Eitan, is it, as our resident data scientist, I'm curious to know from you what would be most helpful in looking at this. I mean, what Mike describes as pretty big data. What's going to be most helpful for us to understand what these numbers mean?
So, I mean, if there's some kind of variable list code book, I think we would start there. I don't know how much is just a bunch of text versus how much things are categorized already. So I think, just a conversation about the structure of the data, and really if it's just a bunch of text, that's a different story than if it's kind of neat and tidy. in a spreadsheet.
Okay, and then we can dig deeper into it on the side. So just the two things I think for next week is let's endeavor next week to understand two things. One, what is the crime data in Brookline? What does crime look like in Brookline? And then two, what are members of our community calling either 911 or directly the police department about? What are they saying through their calls that they need? And I think we can have a really robust discussion next week about those data. In the meantime, I think we do need to start queuing up, and I'll work with Chief O'Leary and Devin likely to start queuing up, bringing in some folks. I certainly want to dig into the role of school resource officers and walk and talk officers. I know that we want to dig into how we address mental health calls, calls for service related to mental health issues, and there may be others. And we'll start queuing those up so we can do deeper dives into those. And as needed, we'll then potentially break off different subcommittees to actually even go further to investigate, how those calls are addressed and whether or not there's a different way, a potentially different way to do that. Any objections, Chief?
I don't have an objection, but just clarification. The annual reports that we do have all the crime data in there. So I'm just trying to figure out how you want it broken down beyond that.
I'll take a look at it. Let's all make sure that we review that. I think some of the questions that we have that others have asked too is how do we compare with other communities and the size of our force compared to other communities that maybe have similar crime data might be very helpful. And I'll try to see if I can actually come up with a list of questions for you that might be helpful for us. If others have questions as well, you should probably send those directly to Devin, and who can compile those and then get those over to the chief. Okay. Last, we don't have as much time as I hoped. Right now, there is a date held on September 30th for us to have a joint public hearing with the Committee on Police Reforms. As I mentioned last week, I'm very interested in a public hearing where the central question, at least for us, is members of the public, where would you like us to focus our work in terms of reimagining? I'm not at all interested in a hearing where people line up to tell us how great things are. It's not going to be very helpful in our work to hear that at this moment. We understand that people are very supportive of the current model. Our work is to potentially come up with a different model. So I'm just curious to hear what others think about this. Do you think we should be holding a separate public hearing? Would you like to partner with the Committee on Policing Reforms on this particular public hearing? Just want to get your thoughts, and if anybody's got something to say, let's try to make it relatively brief just because of the time. Bonnie.
I think that it's really, really complicated, even for us in this group, to separate the idea of reform and reimagining. So I would like to advocate for a separate hearing for that reason.
Okay. Almas, saw your hand.
I just had a logistical question. I don't know what time that public hearing is. Has that been decided?
I believe it was I believe we were endeavoring to host it around 7 p.m. on Wednesday, September 30th.
And then the other thing is, in public hearings that I've attended in the past, is there going to be a back and forth, or is it just a listening session? Because some public hearings, you just take the comments, but you're not interacting. And I just wanted to find out what this particular public hearing was going to be like.
This would be a listening session.
Okay.
Yep. Eitan?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, I understand what you're saying, Raul, about what the right thing is, what feedback we want to solicit. But I would like to solicit feedback at some point from police officers about if they could change one big thing. Like if they were reimagining their work, what would that look like? I mean, I don't know if they can say that freely, but I would really like to know if they had no budget constraints and no logistical constraints, what would they like to see? I just think that's an important, and that's what I want from regular folks too. I want, like, if they're, if they didn't have to think about, budgets or bureaucracy or whatever, like, what would they like to see? That, to me, I want us to be able to encourage people to be creative and to think big picture. And I want that from, we don't need folks from the police department to say everything is perfect. If we ask them to say, what do you think, what would you do different? And they say nothing, we're doing perfectly, then that's useful information for us to hear. But it's also really useful for us to hear if they have big ideas and we have this opportunity to engage with them.
Yeah, I wonder if we should do that through a different format, specifically with police officers, and I guess we'd need to let me look into that and see what's possible there. I'll look into that. Any other thoughts on this? Okay. Let me check in with Bernard Green, who's the chair of the Committee on Policing Reforms, and see if we can work together on a public hearing that meets their goals as well as ours. And I'll bring that back to the group next Friday. If we feel like that can be accomplished, then we can work together. If we feel like it might be better for us to meet our goals on our own, then we can do that separately. Either way, I think it's important that we hear from the public, this month to help guide our work, even as we are digging into the data and everything. I think we also need to hear from members of the public and what they would like to focus on as it relates to reimagining. So, all right. That brings us right to our time. Chief, just want to thank you for the time you put into to that presentation, answering those questions. Thanks to all the staff for being here once again this week, and thanks to all the members of the task force and the public for watching. We'll be back next Friday at 8 a.m. To continue this important work. In the meantime, if you have any questions or feedback, feel free to write me directly, Raul R. Fernandez at brooklinema.gov. Love to hear from members of the public on this. Thanks, and we'll see you again next Friday. Appreciate you, everybody.